Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Johnny B. Truant. Hi Johnny.
Hey, Joanna. Thanks for having me on again.
I know, it's great to have you back on the show and so much has changed, but just as a little introduction, Johnny is the author of fiction across multiple genres, including the sci-fi epic The Beam, unicorn western Fat Vampire, Cursed, and The Bialy Pimps. He's also a podcaster at the Selfpublishing podcast.com, along with Sean Platt and David Wright, and I know a lot of you listen to the show, so this should be an alternative Johnny today. We're going to try and get something new. You never know.
People go to your show and to Simon's Rocking Self-Publishing when they're tired of our off-topic and NSFW.
Yeah, I'm relentlessly on topic. So,
Yeah.
and just not funny either, or swearing. So...
They come to us when they want depravity. So
yeah, exactly. So what's interesting is you last came on the podcast 2 years ago in May 2012, and we're recording this in April 2014. Now, you had just published The Bialy Pimps, and I knew you from your previous kind of life as a sort of professional blogger, internet marketing guru. So tell us who you were then and what has changed in the last couple of years.
Everything. Would you like me to elaborate on that? That was funny because when you were saying that, and you were like 2 years ago, and 2 years ago for me right now is another world. And it was like one of those things where a lot of times you have, established authors, like mostly, and I feel kind of like looking back, like what was I doing on? I had one book. I'd written it 12 years ago, so it in theory took me 12 years to polish it up and stuff. And today, I make my full-time living as an author, and I don't do any of the stuff that I used to do. I closed the doors on the last of the Johnny 1.0, online education sorts of things a few months ago. And so this is my full-time gig now, and the podcast, our self-publishing podcast, is now 2 years old. And so I'm in the same room, and I still work at home. I worked at home before, but other than that, like 100% of my workday it's revamped. It's wiped clean and started again.
Yeah, and just tell us a bit more about what type of books you now have, and about Realm and Sands as well.
Well, Sean Platt, my partner in Realm and Sands, and I, we made the conscious decision to do. To hop genres, which has not been universally accepted by the people who listen, but that's okay because it's not meant as advice. We're telling people what we are doing. And because of that, we tried to hit as many little spots as we could. So this is, to us, this is sort of like, Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek is known as Spock, and poor Leonard Nimoy could never really do anything else because he was always Spock. And we didn't want to be in a position where, like our best serial at this point, our biggest world, is The Beam. And in the time it took to write everything that's on my shelf, virtual and physical right now, we could have written like 6 or 7 seasons of The Beam. But instead we made the conscious decision to say, okay, well, The Beam is sci-fi, unicorn western is like fantasy western gonzo mashup, Cursed is horror, Namaste is like action adventure. What else? We wrote straight comedies. So we have 3 that are just like, they're like written sitcoms. We've collaborated with Lexi Maxwell in the erotica space. We've done nonfiction as fiction in the world of The Beam with a fictional author named Sterling Gibson, and so who is not real. We made him up. And so the whole idea is we wanted to plant all the seeds that we wanted to eventually have early on. And it meant that we were building horizontally rather than vertically, but now we're in a position where we're beginning to really build on top of those franchises, sort of all at once.
So this is, what, is it about 10, I want to say 10 series you've got going?
Well, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I would say we've used the term 12 product funnels is how we usually describe that. But the lines blur a little bit in that. And when we say a product funnel, it's like a product line, which I suppose most authors could just say a series or a serial.
No, and it's amazing. So, which all begs the question, for people who are listening who didn't know you before. And the reason I asked you on the show back then, of course, is I'd spent 3 years learning from you from Johnny 1.0, and I'd bought some of your products and everything. So Johnny 1.0 was kind of a guru to me, which is so funny given where we are now, and I feel like our podcast.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
It's really funny. Like things really move on. But how do you go from writing one novel in 10 years to writing these 12 sort of separate things and gazillions of words? How do you do that? How do you to talk a bit about the process, because I know you talk about it in Write, Publish, Repeat, and we'll come back to Fiction Unboxed, but just give us an overview. How do you do that?
Well, okay, so there's a lot of pieces to that question, and to give people context, we just made a video a little while ago, and the line that I used that I just love, and it had a graphic that went with it, was in 1999 I wrote my first novel, in 2012 I wrote my second, and then in 2013 I teamed up with Sean, and we wrote the word equivalent of 1.5 times the Harry Potter series, which is what you're just referring to. And I think that one was, I am a naturally fast writer. That is something that is not, I don't think everybody needs to write like we do, but I do think that writing quickly relative to your own speed helps get your censor out of the way. So there's the idea of writing fast, but because I write fast, once something clicked in terms of the way to tell a story, both storytelling-wise, but also process-wise, it was like I was just able to click them off like this. And the second major thing, which not everybody is going to have, is like you don't have, is a partner, a writing partner. So with Realm and Sands, there are 2 projects. I keep looking at my bookcase for reference. Unicorn Western and the Beam Worlds, I polish those after they've gone to Sean and gone through a few edits. But most of our work I never see again until it's done. It goes, I write a rough draft. It goes to Sean for 2 rounds of edit and polish and rearrange. Then it goes to our professional editor and then sometimes to beta readers, but I don't see it again. And so when all I'm doing is writing rough drafts, I'm a full-time writer. So if I'm writing for 3 or 4 hours every morning and I write fast, those words pile up really, really quick.
Which is brilliant. And I obviously I don't write with a partner, but I get to keep all the money.
Yes, you do. You do. That is true. That is a big advantage.
Yeah, and I see that. And I've talked, I've interviewed Sean and David Wright on the show as well about collaboration, so I'm not going to ask you about that. What I am going to ask you is, you are, Johnny 1.0 was a self-help guru as well. It was a kind of, he
was a lot of things.
He was, but he was you can be awesome, and it was about kicking people's asses into gear and, about taking control of your life. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about that attitude with, how does the mindset come into becoming that kind of concentrated fiction writer?
Well, okay, so this actually, in Write, Publish, Repeat, we have a lot of this. I sort of think of it as like a tough love or a reality-based approach, because you keep saying I was a guru, and I flinch a little every time. Like, I understand the spirit in which it's intended, but gurus are kind of, I don't know that I really want to be a guru. Yeah. But I think that self-help can have that too, or motivation is, it can be like it's a lot of hot air, or it can be legitimate sorts of things. And one of the things that I tried to really focus on when I was doing a lot of that material was what are the things that people don't want to hear in terms of, and it usually boiled down to, this is hard work, this is going to take a long time, things change slowly. And Write, Publish, Repeat is all about that. It's about, we spend a lot of time saying, look, this is going to take you a really long time. You're going to go through really long, frustrated periods. And so I think that a lot of the stuff that I wrote about when I was doing the earlier stuff has definitely translated into stuff we're doing now, and I think is appreciated by a lot of our listeners and readers, because they're tired of having smoke blown up their butts with the Kindle Gold Rush crap. Or like when you see Hugh Howey, Hugh wrote a lot of books, and then he had one that hit, and he was on our show and was as mystified as anyone else would be by, that's the one that took off. And I think that when people see a lightning strike success, they think, well, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the lightning strike. And our contention is, number one, you can outwork the need for a lightning strike because you just produce and produce, and they may all perform mediocrely at a mediocre level. And also, you're much more likely to have that once you've spent 5 years or 10 years or however long building up a body of work that maybe doesn't go anywhere. So I think that a lot of this is really hard work. We put in tremendous amounts of time. That's stuff that's starting to come back out.
No, absolutely. And it's funny you said that, because I was at London Book Fair last week and was really inspired by the 7-figure indie romance writers, basically. And I was talking to Barbara Freethy, and she has 37 books out. And I worked out that to make $1 million with 37 books, you only have to sell about 10,000 of each book, making around $2 each. And I don't, we can immediately see that that's actually achievable, right? So that's a longer term success. But how long would it take you before you and Sean are at 37 books? Probably not very long.
Well, yeah, but I think that we get ahead of ourselves. So one of the things that we did, I have a few things I can say on this. Let's see if I can keep track of them all in my head. Is 2013 was our crunch year. It was like pilot year. I mean, I didn't even mention Robot Proletariat. Like, there's that too. And so we put out so much stuff that we got ahead of our readership. Like, it was like analysis paralysis. I think they were like, okay, well, if you produce 2 books a year, then I can get excited about your new releases and anticipate them. But we're like, here, it's raining books. And so when we did that, I think we don't proportionately get the reward that we would have gotten with those same exact books spaced out over time. Now, we knew that we did it for a different reason. But the other thing, too, is that I think there is a time thing. And I've only been doing this. I've been full-time for about, 6 months, I think. And I've been writing I've been writing full-time. I've had a full-time income, say, for 6 months. And I've been writing for about a year and a half, like kind of hardcore. And it's been such an intense period of time. Like, how long have you been professionally publishing, Joanna?
Fiction, 2.5 years.
Right. So you're almost as new to this as I am, and it's so hard to be like, man, it feels like we've been doing this forever. But think what's going to be when we're at 10 years, when we're at 20 years. This is a long-term thing. Mm-hmm. And so when I hear that, I think, yeah, we just stick in here and we keep doing what we're doing. And I mean, I'm in this for the long haul.
Yeah, I feel that too. It's so funny you say that, because I look at the big names, like Stephen King. I know you guys like Stephen King. Mm-hmm. And the people who are big names in the space have been doing this for 30 years, 40 years.
Right.
Most of them are in their 50s. So I feel the same way. I feel like, wow, I'm so excited, but we got to remember we're just at the beginning, and which is very, very cool. But I wanted to ask you there, and I think we're of the mind that mistakes are not mistakes, they're learning experiences. Yeah. But what do you think that you and Sean have done, in quotation marks, wrong, or what have you learned from what you've done, and what are you going to change?
Well, we've gone back and forth on best ways to promote, and I wouldn't say that we've found sort of our secret sauce yet. So we completely ignored most of social media, other than just occasional twittering, and we ignored blogging for the first year. We came back to blogging at the beginning of this year, sort of in force. And I used to write what I called epic posts, which really does sound conceited, but whatever. Like, they were big idea posts. And so we said, well, what if I took some of those and we wrote those on our blog at Realm and Sands, and they were about something that was addressed by our books. Like, people would, because I was good at that. Like, I could get people attracted. So, like, we had one on revenge, because our book Namaste is on revenge. We had one on Are We Too Connected, which was a Beam one. And now we've backed away from that too a little bit, because it's the 80-20 rule. It takes so much time and just mental energy to write those. They're so big and involved. that we don't feel like we're getting the benefit out of them. So we haven't figured out promotion. I don't know that that counts as a mistake because it's a work in progress. I think that we probably could do a little bit more in terms of spacing out series. So, for instance, my series Fat Vampire, which I wrote on my own, I had my biggest launches to date were for number 5 and number 6, which are the last two. And I think that happened because people had time to build anticipation. They got through the first 4, and they were like, okay, well, now I'm ready. Now I'm anticipating. Whereas so far, we've just been dump, dump, dump. Now, the Beam is the first one where we're truly getting an anticipated second launch, and that'll be out May 1st. Now, I don't know. We've made a bunch of dumb mistakes, little and big. We just blew a bunch of money on Facebook ads recently that didn't get us anywhere, but it's hard to find those ones. I don't consider that the end. Like, we're going to keep experimenting with Facebook ads. We're going to keep experimenting with blogging.
Yeah, and I think it's great because I think this is part of what we do. We're always experimenting and, sharing things. I'm going to come back to the podcast in a minute. But interestingly, also talking to Bella Andre and Barbara Liliana Hart, for example, they talked about book 5 in a series being absolutely critical, as in it is book 5 that takes off. And I was like, oh, penny drops, because I've got Desecration, the first in another crime series, and I'm like, why aren't more people buying it? And the fact is, it's number 1 in a new series, so it's just the same as it's people don't necessarily cross over between series, even with one author. So this was a real penny drop moment for me. It was like, okay, so you have to get to book 5, which you've seen with Fat Vampire, and the Beam is so big, it's almost 5 in one book.
Sort of, but I can see that for real. Because another thing we've played with, not to go off on something, is the idea of serialization. We've gone back and forth on, do we release individual episodes? Or like my book, The Beam, our book, The Beam, which is, this thick, a couple inches thick, is that's a season. Like, that's 6 episodes. So it really kind of is only one book. And so with the season 2, I'm like, well, we need to get to 3, 4, 5,
Yeah, and it's a big, big. I've read the Beam one, and it's awesome, and it's very big. I want to come back to that in a minute. But the podcasting. So one of the ways that we share, obviously I have a podcast, you have a podcast, and we share what we learn as we go. So how do you think? But of course, podcasting is its own little time suck, and there's many issues with podcasting. How do you think podcasting has been part of kind of changing your life, and do you recommend it for other people?
Well, okay, so you just asked me 2 questions there, and they may have different answers. I don't know that I necessarily. Well, okay, let me answer. How has it changed? If it were not for the podcast, I personally would probably not be doing anything that I'm doing right now. But unique to me, because what happened is, I knew Sean, and I just knew him because Sean's a marketer too. Like, he was in all the same circles as I was. And so I said, let's do a podcast, because he and I had recorded just an interview, and it was about their first experiences with Yesterday's Gone, their serial. And it was cool to be like, wow, that was fun to talk about. Let's keep talking about it. Meanwhile, I had one book. What business did I have? But it's not like I tried to hide that. I was just like, here's my journey with these other guys, and I'll be the reality check. And so through seeing how they worked and how they got past their hurdles, it was both directly and indirectly responsible for helping to change the way that I thought about storytelling and writing. And then I started working with Sean. And I've produced a pretty good amount by myself, but I've produced way, way more with my partner. So for me, it's made a huge difference. And that's not even counting the stuff that most people would normally think of. But I think that the masterminding that occurs between us, even if nobody was listening, is huge, because we get ideas for ways to do growth hacking stuff. I don't want to detour into Write, Publish, Repeat, but our nonfiction book has driven sales of our fiction. And our podcast, which is nonfiction self-publishing, has driven sales of our fiction books as well. So that's huge. Now, as to whether I would recommend it, I think that it's definitely an 80-20 thing for a lot of people. And I think it would be a mistake if everybody took away from listening to 2 of us and say, I'm going to now talk about self-publishing. And then we have a ton of people talking about publishing. Like, that doesn't make sense. But I know some people have had some success sort of being like Dave. Dave is doing his Walking Dave podcast, where he's just talking about his process, and it's an easy way for him to produce content and share with his fans. And that may be depending on your level of tech ability and how much work you have to put into it.
I think anything that makes people more human, because with words on a page, it's still, there's still no smile, there's no sound of the voice. Mm-hmm. more about me by listening to my voice, than you would otherwise. And by seeing us, people get that. And I think that's a big part of doing this type of thing, and doing video as well. Mm-hmm. I think it's like, oh wow, look, that's Johnny, and that's a picture behind him that looks really cool. That type of thing. But on that, you mentioned the masterminding between us, you and Sean, and even if nobody's watching, but you have something going on where people can watch your masterminding and your process, don't you? Tell us about that.
Oh, you mean the next thing? Because I'm like, well, we're kind of doing that already. Are you referring to Fiction Unboxed?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, so when we wrote our nonfiction publishing book, Write, Publish, Repeat, which is Write, Publish, Repeat, not Write, Publish, Repeat, which is what everybody thinks. We people loved that, and we got a really great initial reaction. But people were still like, yeah, but how? And I think people even said that, like in the reviews and stuff, they'd say, well, this is great, but how? And we're like, well, we just spent all that time telling you how. But the question was, how do you write all that stuff? I got to write, publish, repeat, but how do I get the stories out? How do I get past my blocks? How do I arrange my day? And so they'd ask, like, well, so what's your process? You outline, and then you do this, and what percentage of time? And so rather than fielding all those questions, we said, well, why don't we just show everybody? Mm-hmm. So what Fiction Unboxed is we're going to write a novel live in 30 days and let everybody watch everything. So it'll be a 75,000 word plus novel, like a full-length novel. And I'm going to write in the mornings, and I'm going to take those words and stick them up on a dedicated website so that people can see them in their raw form. Sean will write his beats, which are like a loose outline, and post those and explain it. We're going to record all of our story meetings like this between you and me. If this were between me and Sean, we'd record it and share all of those, share our emails. It's basically end-to-end. And we're doing it through Kickstarter, which has an ulterior motive that all of our podcast listeners know about, in that it promotes our self-publishing sort of side of our business, but at the same time, we think it'll do what Write, Publish, Repeat did and raise our profile in general. So we're doing that on Kickstarter starting April 22nd.
And where can people find out specifically about that?
Well, when is this going to air?
Well, let's pretend it could be anybody listening anytime. So is there a link they'll be able to
All right, anybody anytime. Okay, I'm not actually sure what happens to Kickstarters once they're done and they go into the archive, but between April 22nd and May 1st of 2014, you would just search Kickstarter for Fiction Unboxed. Prior to that, we have an early sign-up notification that's selfpublishingpodcast.com/fiction-unboxed, because we're going to have like day one bonuses and stuff. And after that, I honestly don't know. I suppose it stays on Kickstarter, but I don't know what we're going to do with it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you will package it up.
Probably. Although I got to tell you, working with Dave and as many jokes as we make about info products, I'm like, so that would be an info product, right? And would we sell it for $97? I don't know if I can do that anymore, even though that seems logical.
It does seem logical. And it is funny listening to you guys talk about that, because, I have training courses for authors as well on my site, and when people want something, they're happy to pay for it. So Dave will come around, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. And I had things for sale for $97 when I was doing a lot of them.
Exactly. So I want to briefly, before I come back to the business side, ask you about the Beam. Because I've tried a couple of your books, and this is what is interesting about you guys having all of these different products, is you have some which are clearly in the humor category, of which I'm just not I'm not the target audience for that.
Right.
I really like the beam. I think it's brilliant. And from what I think you have degrees in genetics. Am I right?
Genetics and philosophy.
Exactly. That's my point. Is the beam is a very intelligent book. From as I read it, I'm like, wow, this is the educated side of Johnny, and this kind of the far more serious side of you, and then the funny stuff seems to me much lighter. So I wanted to ask you about that. Like, are you finding that all of this means you can reconcile these sides of you? Does this make you really happy, or how are you reconciling all of this?
Oh, that's such a fun question. So yeah, I mean, I went to school for molecular genetics and philosophy, and I went to grad school for a year. Like, I was getting a PhD, and now I was on scholarship and stuff, so I don't look and say that I wasted a bunch of money, but I feel like, why did I spend all that time? Like, now I'm an author. And what's really, really cool is that I didn't intend to do any of that. It's not like I'm Michael Crichton's stuff. It tends to be very scientific sometimes, or was, or like Tom Clancy is very detail oriented. And I didn't set out to do that. I didn't say I'm gonna do any of that. But the first time it cropped up was actually in Fat Vampire, and I had of all things, right? So I had somebody after one of the books like email me and say, I don't think you really know what a retrovirus is because you did this wrong. And I said, no, let me explain to you exactly how it worked in the book. And they're, okay, well, whatever. But it's the sort of thing that I think any writer, if they're lucky, has had that experience where you find yourself going down a path and you're like, oh, well, I know how to explain that. And for me, a lot of it has been stuff that has to do with biology. What you're talking about in the beam is, with a lot of the tech stuff, I just we're just like, this sounds jargony enough that we know it's kind of akin to this, and we don't need to understand what all those little things, we don't need to know exactly the moving parts of the nanobots. But then when they're, a lot of the beam is about the line between we as people and our connectivity as facilitated by technology. And so when they're working on things like brain, beam, which is our network, interfacing, or anything like that, or the nature of consciousness, those are the explanations that come out of me. So there's a scene in the first one where our, this isn't a spoiler, where our upgrades dealer, because people are getting augmented, biological augmentations, like, chips in their brains and stuff. When our salesman Doc goes in to get his upgrades wholesaler, and they show him to the wrong place, and it's this really high end stuff. And then I needed to have the scientist rattle on about like how these things would work. I'm like, oh, I know how to do this. And when we get into some of the stuff about consciousness, then that's just all the philosophy. So I love that that's a part of writing, that suddenly this is fully integrated with what I learned. It came full circle.
And I like that best. Like, for me, when I read a book, I want to learn stuff. And I feel that even though the beam is sci-fi, I still feel there's enough of your research and, like you say, your Sterling Gibson stuff that's there, that I feel like, oh, I just learned something, which is really cool. So, yeah.
Did you read Plugged? I don't know if you read Plugged.
I haven't, but it's kind of, one of those things I kind of want to read because it's so interesting. But tell people about that.
Plugged was fun. So the scenario is, if Sterling Gibson he's basically Malcolm Gladwell, right? If you put Malcolm Gladwell in the year 2097 and you're looking back at how things have changed, a la The Tipping Point or anything like that, or Outliers, that's basically Sterling Gibson. And so he's an author who writes in 2097, which is when the beam takes place. And the book Plugged the tagline is how hyperconnectivity and the beam changed the way we think. And so it's about the history of evolution of thought, but going back in the past. So I think the earliest times that are referenced are in the 1970s. And so I had to do a lot of sort of incidental research, not just in terms of what actually occurred. So there's a guy named Dennis Hope, this is real, who claims he owns the moon. He just claimed it. He's like, hey, UN, like, I own the moon. Like, that's a real thing, and it's in Plugged. But then there's a bunch of stuff that obviously we made up, but that had to make sense. So something that, for example, I referred to, there's a, it's called the lattice that's over. It's like a missile net essentially over the U.S. the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Sorry, UK, you guys apparently got nuked over there in the Wild East, but it protects us, and so it's like this big dome. And I had to explain how that worked. So I described it as being about the weight and thickness of aluminum foil. And so I had to say, okay, well, a sheet of aluminum foil that could cover the continent, how much would that weigh? And what would be the engineering involved to make something like that work? And so it was fun. Like, it was a research project.
Yeah, which is awesome. After the famous discussion around the pink smoke for Unicorn Weston, which the objection was, don't you have to do a lot of research for Westerns? And you said, no, you don't. You can just, make it up, and thus wrote Unicorn Weston. But now it seems like you are really getting into research, and that is playing a big part of the books.
We talked about this when you were on our show. I think that the word research has a lot of baggage with it. And it conjures up images of term papers and stuff. But I was in Beam Season 2, our character Nikolai goes, he's from Italy, and he goes up into the Netherlands, and then he goes over and he crosses the English Channel Tunnel and goes up into England. And so I had to research all that stuff. But that's basically me looking at maps. There's a Beam World story where we have an ultra runner who runs this 100-mile race called the Western States. And so I got out a terrain map and figured out where they went. And that's just kind of like, I can imagine them there. I can imagine them that. It's just fun. And you do it for real. You go and travel.
Yeah, it's fun. To me, research is fun. It is the point. It's part of the point of writing.
I'll get there.
Yeah. Well, I want more of those. I'm looking forward to Beam Season 2. But I wanted to ask, because one of the things I'm kind of obsessed with at the moment is how people can go from being an author to running a business as an author, so being a CEO of a publishing business. And this is something you've clearly done in the last 2 years, even though you were already an entrepreneur. So how do you think people can go from being just an author to running a business as an author?
Yeah, I feel like I'm running about 6 businesses right now. So just to give you an example, we are doing, and then I'll actually answer the question. We're doing the launch for both this Kickstarter project, Fiction Unboxed, and for Beam Season 2 right now. And so what that means is we aren't just going to make the project available or make the Beam available. We want to think, what can we do? So one of the first things we did was we said in Season 1, let's pull that book and change the calls to action at the end of the book so that they say, get ready for Beam Season 2 and lead to like an early sign-up list. And so we're thinking through the mechanics of that logical progression for a customer. We did a series of posts on the blog. The one that ran yesterday asks people to leave in the comments their favorite moments from Beam Season 1, and we're going to give somebody a free print copy of Season 2. And so it's all about not just here's the material, which is what I think a lot of writers do, but how do I make this more rich for the consumer, for the customer and reader? How do I make them really interested? How do I bond them with us? And so I think that, for us, it takes on crazy proportions because we're running 4 imprints plus 2 podcasts plus a nonfiction franchise and a Kickstarter project. But I think for most people, it can come down to treating it more seriously. Like it doesn't matter what your working hours are, but have them. Make them regular, make them religious. I like to ask questions like, if you had a day job that you were being paid for, would you kind of show up whenever you wanted? Would you then talk about being that you're blocked? I say nobody ever gets plumber's block. Like, I couldn't fix your pipes in the basement because I wasn't struck by the muse. Like, you get fired. Like, what a jerk. And when you have a job that you're taking seriously, you wouldn't make stupid expenses. You wouldn't say, this book that I don't really have any reason that it would sell, I'm going to spend $1,000 on the cover. You wouldn't have an open door policy with your kids if you have them, where they can just come in at any time. They have to respect your boundaries. I work with these big, huge headphones on, playing loud music with my door closed, and everybody knows not to bother me. And I think that if you consider your writing to be like a job, something where you are responsible for keeping the hours, turning out the profit, making things make logical business sense, that will help.
And then I guess my final question is, again, you are a businessman. You were running a successful online business before you were doing this. So obviously this is viable. This is a viable business, and you've seen that this is viable. So I want you to, explain why did you give all of that up for writing fiction, and what are you excited about in terms of the future of this business model?
Well, I've always wanted to write fiction. So I think that some people, I hope there aren't many of them, I think that some people get hooked with the Kindle Gold Rush crap, and they say, this looks like a good way to make money. And not that I'm casting any dispersions, but that's how John Locke said in his book he approached it. Boy, this looks like an opportunity. No, I'm a writer, and I've always wanted to be a fiction writer, but there was no viable way to do it. It was like, okay, so I can and I did that thing where I submit query letters, and I read Writer's Market, and just terrible. And you get rejection letter after rejection letter. And so I've always been steering toward this. Like when I was doing my other business, I was still driving all of my interest through writing. It was through personality. It was through creative ways to... Even when I was doing blog installs, it was my blog that was popular, writing about things that had nothing to do at all with what I did to make money, because it bonded people to me. It made them like me. And so I've always tried to find a way to use my writing to make money, because there was no way to do it directly. And what I like about this is finally, and this is what clicked when I did that interview with Sean 2 years ago, was like, now this is viable. And it really is. It's just about building assets. It's just about, you don't have to have one book that sells 100,000 copies in a month. You can have, 100 books that sell 1,000 copies in a month, and you get exactly the same thing. Or you don't even need that, because you're getting 70% for most platforms. And so I don't know if I'm giving you the answer, if I'm like going off track, but it's a logical business for me. It makes sense if you treat it like a business. You asked about the future, I think, though.
Yeah, well then taking it on to the future, if I interview you again, and I hope I will, in another 2 years, who will I be interviewing then? What do you see for the next 2 years?
Well, this is always fun, because then 2 years from now, maybe I'm going to look like an idiot. But I do think, one of my, I have a friend named Lee, and he has a quote where he says, in the future, I predict that people will want to be entertained. And so when people start to talk about, will Kindles be around? Will Kobo readers, because they're our friends, right, want to be around? How will people be reading? Well, the answer is they may be reading differently. The rules may be different. The commission structures may be different. The laws may be different. But people are not going to stop wanting to be entertained. Like even if reading dies, like I don't see that happening, but even if that dies, you're a storyteller, right? You can tell a story in whatever medium there is. So with that in mind, I do think that I do see some trends that I would predict. I agree with Jim Kukral from Author Marketing Club, who says that this right here, maybe not phones, but mobile reading is going to be increasingly popular. We're doing some direct sales experiments now, which are very, very preliminary. But I think that's going to be interesting, because we can do some bundling. So as an author, you're sort of building... You used to have to be shelved next to people, and now you can kind of be shelved next to yourself. So I think that the new paradigm is you find people. This is how people find you. They're interested in you already. They're going to the bookstore looking for you because you've built devoted regular fans. And so I think that once you have them, you open up some things like, okay, well, you can get my entire catalog, which you could buy separately for $100 for $50 on our website or something like that. So I do see expansion of maybe direct sales, hopefully, maybe through apps, mobile reading. But in general, we're just going to keep trying to satisfy readers, bond with and satisfy readers as our primary thing. And the podcast will probably be a large part of that, even though it's about satisfying writers.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that continues. And my podcast is, I think, 3.5 years old now, which is kind of crazy. And, yours, I think, is 2 years, isn't it?
Two years as of almost exactly 2 years.
Yeah.
And yours just underwent a little reinvention, too. So
yeah, well, this is the crazy thing. I think the good thing about being an author, being a creative, is that we're always changing. We're always morphing into somebody else, and we're just kind of telling people about it on the way. So I'm really excited about our future. I really am.
and I also think too that even if you don't have a partner or a mastermind or whatever, that I mean, so there are three of us on the Self-Publishing podcast, and that creates a little mastermind. But I think that even if it were just the three of us, it would be a little too insular. So the fact that we talk to you and we talk to CJ Lyons and we talk to Ed Robertson and all the other people that we've talked to, David Gogren and everybody that we've had on, it is a community that we're all learning from each other. So one of the things we learned from you about Kobo, we weren't paying attention to Kobo. We're looking at translation. I forget who it was who really kind of started doing audio that made us say, maybe we should do audiobooks. And so those are things that may not have occurred to us because I think any one person's view can tend to be a little myopic. And so I think that having community is huge.
Yeah, and the indie ecosystem continues to be ahead of the pack. Having just come from London Book Fair, it was like I was in a parallel universe between the traditional publishing room and the indie room. It was like, wow, I am so happy to live in my part of this universe.
I think that I think traditional publishing, there's things definitely we can learn from them, but they're not agile. That's the one thing that can definitely be said is no matter who's right, they can't move as quickly as we can. And so I think in that way we have a big advantage.
We do. Wow, exciting times, Johnny. So where can people find you and your books online?
Selfpublishingpodcast.com does tend to be our default hub. But for our writing, it is realmandsands.com, not Roman Sands, which for some reason. We're going to be doing the big Fiction Unboxed Kickstarter April 22nd through May 21st of 2014. And we have our book right publisher, Pete.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Johnny.
Thanks for having me on.